everybody. We're going to be talking about healthy relationships today. I cannot actually see myself, so hopefully the camera, I'm using a different computer, so hopefully I'm not just like up my nostril or something. All right, I'm just going to assume that I am a normal distance away from the camera. All right, so let's just hop right into it because the next slide we're going to go over like our main overview. I'm glad you're here. Richard, would you mind putting it to the next slide? All right. Oh yeah, I guess I kind of forgot to introduce myself. I'm Colleen Conklin. I'm an intern at the Counseling Center at Texas State, and I'll be graduating with my doctorate in about a month. So I kind of know what I'm talking about to some extent, but also I have like much more to learn, and I'm learning a ton of stuff with you all too. So anyhow, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I was a little like scatterbrained from all of my technical difficulties. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about attachment styles.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay. We're not. We're going to wait.
Do you have any headphones or another like speaker that you could use, or a microphone that you could use?
You know, I do have another, I have some headphones, but I think they're in my room. 1 second. I'll go grab them. Okay. Sorry. Thanks for bearing with us, y'all. Okay.
Hey, Colleen, we can't hear you. You might want to hit the little up arrow by the mute button and then connect your earphones.
Can you hear it now?
Perfect.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for helping me out. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me. Oh my gosh, y'all. My headphones were like just the worst amount of, you know, tangled that they could possibly be. Anyhow, moving right along. All right, so we're going to talk today about understanding our attachment styles. So that might seem a little bit like psychobabble, but basically that's going to orient us to how we relate to others. And then how to use our emotions as informative data, which also sounds a bit dry, but it's actually really helpful to look at what's going on and kind of parse it apart so that we can work with it better. If we understand why and what's happening, we can make changes better. And then also communicating effectively and maintaining boundaries. So how to communicate your boundaries. And all of this hopefully will be applicable to family, friends. A lot of it I'm going to focus on partnerships, romantic partnerships specifically, but I think these skills can really be utilized across the board with lots of different relationships. So whatever you're needing to focus on, hopefully you'll be able to take some of this info and move it forward in whatever way you need it. But because of the stage of life a lot of folks are in college, maintaining healthy relationships, making them, and figuring out what you need can be a pretty important stage. So that's what we're going to focus on. All right. Oh, and then my little asterisk on the bottom. So a lot of the research I'm using to inform this presentation is from European influence. So in Canada is one of the studies, one big study, and then the other is from the US. And I think it's just worth noting that different families have different procedures of communication. So while I think it's helpful for all of us to understand what's going on, how you might communicate that to your family may differ depending on what your cultural background is and what's appropriate for your family. So it's never to shame any family in doing things the wrong way, but it's this is more of a Eurocentric, research-informed way of communicating. So with that said, just remember every family, has its beautiful things. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so I just wanted to start with the broad concept of connection from Brené Brown. She's awesome. So I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. That is a pretty tall order. You might even have to read that twice to really take it all in, but to feel seen and heard and valued, I think is something we can all hope for in the people we surround ourselves with. But that part without judgment can be harder to come by. And then also finding yourself being stronger when you come out of that relationship or when you're in the relationship rather than depleted frequently. This is, I think, the ideal thing to shoot for in a connection and in a relationship. And I think it's just a good starting point to orient ourselves towards what we're working towards. So you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, and then before we get started and really diving in, this is going to be kind of like a hybrid between a psychology class a little bit just because I want to nerd out about it. And they let me do the webinar. So y'all get to come on this journey with me. But I also want it to be applicable. So take a moment just to think of your primary relationships, your family, significant others in the past, the relationships you're hoping to make, some of your best friends, and think about the parts of those relationships that you really value, that you love about them, and some things you wish you could change, things that are hard for you in those relationships. And this can be both on your side and on the other person's side. So just take a second to yourself and think about those. And my hope is that you can keep those in mind as we continue talking about things. That way you can apply the information, which should solidify it in your memory a little bit more. All right, go ahead into the next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about attachment style, which is so fun. Y'all, it's the best to understand attachment. So the nature of the thoughts we have are often related to our attachment style. That's why we're talking about it. The thoughts we have, the way we relate to others, how we interpret the world, it's all, I think, and a lot of research would suggest, rooted in our attachment style. And it's completely adaptive. So I have in the middle of this slide, I have a lot of words on these slides. Let's just talk about the definition and then I'll hop into my excitement about it. So attachment's a deep and enduring emotional bond that connects one person to another across time and space. And I would say this attachment is not just talking about time emotionally. This means something as a baby in your childhood, the way you felt before you had words, impacts the way when you're 25 are still feeling and relating to others. So it's not just attachment to one person, it's a way of feeling in the world towards others in general. There's no getting out of having an attachment style because as babies, we don't always have words for what we're feeling and thinking. So our body and our minds orient themselves to make sense of the situation, you have to harness your energy. If you're in your crib and you're crying and you're not getting any attention, you may learn after a while to soothe yourself, calm down, and to not trust that people are always going to come pick you up. And the same is true. Some may learn to scream louder to get the attention of a caregiver. And so all these things kind of happen inside of us before we have the words to think about it. And it gets kind of written into our body and into our minds in order for us to kind of weave and navigate the world in different ways. And all these styles are not meant to define you by any means. They're rather just to deepen your understanding of yourself. I can't say that enough. Sometimes I think, especially in psychology classes, if any of you have taken those, when you talk about stuff that applies to you, it's easy to go down like a rabbit hole of like, oh my gosh, like I'm damaged beyond repair, and I really, really don't want anyone to feel that way. These are just ways of classifying the typical or more common ways people develop attachment styles. It is not meant to pathologize or put you in a small box. People are very complex and complicated. So oftentimes we have flavors of a couple rather than just one, like in one box. So just keep that in mind. I don't mean to like be like fear mongering, but maybe I'm keeping you interested. I don't know. I can't see anyone's faces, so we'll just hope that it's interesting. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so we're going to talk about some infant research. And again, I won't hit this like too hard. I'll try to make it concise. But I think it's interesting and helpful to understand where the research came from. So this was Mary Ainsworth in Canada, studied infants, so before they could talk, and they had mothers come in with them, put them in a room with some toys, and then they'd have the mother leave, and then they'd watch what happened. They were video recording all of this. It was in the 70s. And they'd watch what the baby did before the mother left, while the mother was gone, and what the baby did after the mother returned. And then they did follow-up studies on all of these babies like 25 years later and found that the findings were consistent throughout time with the way these adults were still responding to relationships in their lives. So with that research, they were able to classify folks in certain ways. So we'll start with secure, which is the one we all hope we can get to, or at least get towards. And again, even if your parental relationship may mimic some of the less desirable styles, the outcomes, it just takes one really secure, long-standing attachment to get you into that secure place. So these kids would feel safe and seek connection after they cried. So the mom would leave the room, the baby would cry, and then the mom would come back in, and they could be like, okay, you're back, I'm good. And that's reassurance received despite the reaction. Later in life, those folks tend to trust people, utilize healthy coping skills in difficult relationships. So that means generally their primary caregiver, at least in these cases, the mom, was consistent enough in tending to their needs that they felt like they could trust that she would come back, and that when she did come back, she wasn't leaving again. And then for the avoidant folks, that's another category. So they would often appear unfazed, and that could be likely due to the parent not always being present for the needs. Like I talked about earlier, being in the crib, screaming enough, and not having anyone come. These babies kind of learned, I should probably just rely on myself. Like I'm probably the safest and most reliable person. So when the moms in the study left these children, they appeared unfazed because they were kind of used to it, or not used to being left, but just not as interacting with the outside world. Also, these kids kind of avoided expressing their needs to be soothed, or when the mom did come to soothe them, they wouldn't really want it, maybe shy away, more self-focused. And in life, that can look later in life like appearing selfish or aloof. It's really hard to be vulnerable. You kind of want to pull away from partners in times of difficulty. Just having a hard time sitting with emotions, sitting with things, because the way our main attachment or parental figure treats us early in life, and I'll touch on this a little later, is often the way we then orient to relate to ourselves. So I'll talk about that a little bit more, but let's move on to the next two. There's only 4 total. All right. So then we get to the ambivalent attachment and preoccupied. So that's, the kids had a range of experiences, anxious, angry, and passive, but generally this is more of an anxious one. So I may refer to it as the anxious attachment later on just by accident, because that's the way I think about it. And in this study, those children were really difficult to soothe. So they were often anxious before the mom left. And then when the mom came back, they were still really anxious, like really hard to get that anxiety down. And again, that's when the parental figure has potentially not met the needs consistently enough to be trusted. But instead of the previous attachment where they rely on themselves, this one, like, the amps up the energy. The energy gets more consumed with being left alone. So it's a similar reaction or a similar situation as the avoidant, but then just the personality of the baby or the person leans a different direction with it. And so later in life, this can look like trust being really difficult, feeling really hyper aware of your partner, like what are they thinking, what are they doing, do they love me? And then fear of others being unreliable or unpredictable, just because, again, before words, learning that people didn't always meet your needs appropriately, which then you still want that, you just don't know if they're going to give it to you. And then disorganized is the last one. This was added a little later, and this is the least common one. This is when kids were kind of just disoriented the whole time. There wasn't even a ton of consistent findings, but basically this is when a parent was both really scary and really loving at the same time. So someone, parents potentially with alcohol or drug abuse issues that maybe hit or scared like very quickly after hugging. So before words, the child learned this person that I love is also really scary. And it's hard to consolidate all that information. And even throughout life, that's hard to understand. And later in life, this also can help have a hard time with self-regulation, can be difficult, usually because it's not modeled for you or provided for you to learn from. And then wanting to be close to people while simultaneously pushing them away. Just very confusing, and often wanting or seeking a partner to regulate. Again, people can have flavors of all of these. I don't want anyone to pathologize themselves due to the type of upbringing that you may have had. But I think this knowledge is power to know that some of these things that are built into us can impact the way we react to things and the way we feel when we're getting close and trusting people. So let's get to the next slide. Okay, so this is kind of what I was saying a little bit earlier about our experiences and relationships with others are the way we often relate to ourselves. So again, with being secure, folks may, they go through hard times, they have anxious times, they want to avoid love sometimes, and then at the end of the day, they may like, I'm going to take the leap, I'm going to do this. Avoidant folks may avoid their feelings, oftentimes because the parental figure was a little more dismissive of feelings. They weren't worth looking into, so they learned early on, let's not make a fuss. Let's not make this a big deal. Let's, not pay attention to them. And then anxious folks may have learned that the world was scary, and their parental figure may have been anxious and preoccupied a lot, maybe even taking them away from the child's ability to feel seen and heard. And again, we learn by watching, and then also with not feeling like the world is safe. So towards yourself, towards your own emotions, getting anxious that you even have anxiety can be a way that manifests. And then with the more chaotic, disoriented attachment, that also can just feel really confusing, like a lot of emotions happening at once. People being scary and wonderful, you want to rely on them and you're scared of them all at the same time. And you can feel that within yourself. Like, I don't know what's happening within me because there's so much going on. And that is a fair and normal experience. And again, I can't emphasize enough that you adjust and get your attachment style because you have to. Like, this is your way of surviving, and that is why it is developed. So it's not something to hate or be angry about. We can work on these things. This is not permanent, especially when you know what's going on. You can systematically work through this stuff to get to a place where you can feel more secure, even if you have to, you know, weed through the weeds of other stuff going on. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of, I guess I'm kind of looping some stuff together. But again, I just can't emphasize enough. I don't want people to diagnose or categorize themselves. I just want this knowledge of you, your partner, your family members, just to keep these things in mind, because I think it can really provide your own self-awareness to what the situation is. It's like taking a step back and looking in on what dynamic is playing out right now. That way, because emotions are so intense, and we're going to get into those in a second, I think it's so helpful to know why the emotions are so intense. People aren't just, you know, doing this for fun. People have feelings because that is the way they've adapted through time to survive. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with just an example to kind of make this more real time, maybe take us all out of our heads a little bit. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe when I learned about attachment in undergrad and grad school, I thought about it too much. I was like always in my head about me and my family. But let's just talk about it in a very subjective or objective manner. So partner one, I just did not even come up with names, but here we go. Partner one had a hard day at work or school, and when they get home, their partner number two, doesn't listen when partner number one shares their feelings. Say one person is playing video games or at work, maybe just finishing up work. The other one comes in really feeling a lot of emotion. And so partner one's feelings are hurt. They feel isolated. They think they don't even care about me. They get upset, say never mind, and then just leave the room. So let's just take a step and like look at what might be going on for both partners in this situation. Let's go to the next slide. Here we go. Oh, okay, here we go. So now partner number two, the one who's doing some work, still slightly unaware like what just happened potentially, and just thinks the first partner is overreacting. They could brush it off and ignore it. They could think like, I never get anything right. Maybe if they're having some more depressive symptoms, they may think that way. They might get angry and externalize the sadness, just like, like you always like mad that the partner's making them feel this way. Or they can go speak to the partner and explore what happened calmly. And that one might seem like the least likely, hopefully not. But I think just as humans, all having our own attachment styles and moods and stress, sometimes the first three might be more common. But hopefully we can think about this through the lens of, say, partner number one was having some anxiety that their partner didn't like doesn't care enough to know when they said, I had a really hard day. Meanwhile, like partner number two, maybe they're leaning a little avoidant, and they're like, why is all this feelings and emotions coming at me, feeling this need to dismiss it, it's overwhelming, it's too much, and wanting to take space, which then exacerbates the first person feeling isolated and alone. So let's go to the second, or the next slide, I mean. All right, so kind of what I just said, anxiety and avoidance can trigger one another. So when one person becomes withdrawn, the other can get more anxious or more preoccupied with like, why are they not calling me back, or why did they not text me back? Meanwhile, I don't know why I keep saying meanwhile. Who says meanwhile? I'm not even sure if that's a word. Anyhow, the person with anxiety, you know, maybe asks a lot of questions, really wants to know what's going on in the mind of their partner. And that may be overwhelming and cause the person who's a little avoidant to withdraw, again, kind of causing that cyclical reaction where they kind of exacerbate each other. And if this is feeling too relatable, just know that folks who lean a little anxious and folks who lean a little avoidant just often find one another. So it's a common pairing, and it doesn't mean you're doomed by any means, but it is, you know, it's just the way sometimes we're drawn sometimes to the thing that feels familiar, even if it's uncomfortable. So both increase the likelihood of the less preferable action. So neither, like when you really indulge those parts of yourself, they tend to exacerbate the situation and don't tend to help. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so now let's talk about navigating those emotions just for both partners and even a hypothetical partner with other emotions. So these waves of emotion come on. They're natural because you care about the person and you want to have love and stability. So you may feel defensive or fear that you're getting rejected. And so the emotions are going to happen, even if you shove them down and try not to pay attention, they're there. So I would encourage you to stop and notice them. So just take a second, recognize that they're there, be curious and kind. I think that's one of the most beautiful things one of my professors told me, to just always try to have folks try to be curious and kind to themselves. And whatever thought pops up with whatever emotions arising, don't necessarily believe it. So that thought of they don't care about me or I can't do anything right, those thoughts are not always true, and oftentimes they're not. They're usually our emotions screaming something at us to let us know that there's something that we need to pay attention to. But the thought, the way that emotion gets articulated in our mind is often with this absolute language. So on the bottom there, I say, especially when using absolute language, like they don't care, so they don't, or I can never. You know, thinking, is this true? It feels true, it sure does, and that is totally valid, but is it? I don't know. It feels like they don't care about me, or sometimes I feel like I can't do anything right. You know, just notice when you're using that absolute language, because that'll especially make the things that your emotions are indicating to your mind, they're going to seem true, and they're just not usually. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So again, just kind of reiterating this, sounds, I don't know if this sounds cool to folks, but it's hard. This is really, really hard to do. So when a strong feeling arrives and you notice it and you name it and you honor it, just notice the language you're thinking is saying. I already mentioned that. But if you have a really hard time knowing what you're feeling, a lot of folks, when I ask them this in sessions, are like, I don't know, I'm uncomfortable. And it's okay, that's a start. So one thing to try to get to understanding what you might be feeling, if it feels really mucky and not understandable, is what would my anger say if it could talk? So you just feel like you're bursting at the seams with anger. What if your anger was a little squirrel on your shoulder? What would that squirrel say? You know, it's I can't do anything right. It's okay, let's get there. Sometimes extrapolating the feeling into a separate entity, it sounds a little kooky, but it can help understand what that emotion is trying to convey to you. And then communicate that to your partner. So once you realize what your emotion is trying to tell you, try to communicate that. If you don't, and you just leave it and don't address it, resentment can build. I think resentment, I wanted to, make sure I emphasize this. Resentment's a really good indicator that you have needs that aren't being met, that you don't feel like your time is being respected. So anytime you start to feel agitated and you're not even sure why, you just feel irritable and just the feelings of resentment, be curious about those two, because oftentimes it's not always about they left dishes in the sink again. It's the feeling underneath that they don't care that I'm the one always doing the dishes, which means you probably need to go a step back and communicate that again. And again, if that is continuing to be communicated and that resentment continues to build because it's not being respected, then that's, you know, another conversation altogether. So trying to communicate by saying, I feel, so starting with, I know this sounds kind of like cliche, but I feel, and then pick your feeling. Like, I feel sad when you don't listen, or when it seems like you're not listening. So make sure to say the I feel. And this is really important because people can't argue with your feelings. It's not to win the argument that we're using the feelings. It's to get somewhere with this discussion or with this feeling, because that's what's going on underneath. So instead of, you don't listen to me, I feel unheard, or I feel sad when you don't seem to listen, or when you don't listen, or when you don't respond. And then reflect back your partner's feelings. So if you're the partner getting that feedback, it sounds simple, but stating, I hear that you feel sad when I don't respond. And you can add your own, I feel confused when I'm still working and you come in talking about stuff that I don't realize is a big deal. So then you're starting to say, I feel confused, I feel sad. You know, you're indicating the humanness underneath your very human reactions. That way you can actually get somewhere with what's happening. Next slide, please. All right. So it comes down to providing yourself compassion. This is kind of like a side tangent, and we're going to kind of keep going through the conflict resolution a little bit. But I wanted to touch on how important it is to give yourself compassion and patience in order to do that for the other. So when you're overwhelmed, when you leave the room because you didn't feel like you were listened to, or when you're sitting there confused because you don't know what you just did wrong, give yourself compassion for a second. Like, take a second, not only notice and be curious about it, but be kind to yourself. You're not trying, hopefully, to push people away. It's a matter of not understanding where you're both coming from. And in any relationship, just throwing the plug of just getting in touch with yourself, you know, having your own hobbies, finding balance. Like, I wrote Singing and Dancing Alone because I was doing that yesterday. And just, you know, like, continuing to love and treat yourself well. That is going to be a key component of being able to have a relationship that's healthy with another person. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some questions to consider, and these I got from the Gottman Institute, so I felt like I need to give them a shout out. These are some folks in Seattle who, they have this house that they study couples exclusively, and they test everything about the people who stay, all the couples that stay in this house, like from like the urine that goes into the toilet to their heart rates. They video monitor them, and they've found some really important data that can predict with like a 90% accuracy rating whether or not a couple will stay together or not. So it's super refined. Obviously, the study's consensual. The people aren't, like, you know, being tested without their knowledge and that kind of thing. So anyhow, so I say that to give these like some weight because this has been really thoroughly researched. So questions to consider how you should be relaying this information is, what do you need to feel loved, fulfilled, secure? What does your partner need? How can we meet each other's needs? How can we compromise? So again, in that previous example, the person number one, they need to be listened to, probably. They need to be heard, and they need to be responded to accordingly. And partner number two may need to understand that that's what number one is wanting. So they may need to finish their work. Maybe they're doing something that requires a lot of focus, and they can't just stop really quickly and listen well. So maybe they need their partner to communicate, and they need to find, like, okay, will you come, like when you come home and I'm focused on something, would you mind telling me that you need me to listen? Like, I've had a really hard day. Can I talk to you? And if I say, I'm focusing on something, can I talk to you in 5 minutes? It could sound harsh, but both people are saying their needs. One is like, I need you to hear me. And the other one's saying, I truly want to hear you, and I'm also doing this other thing. And if you can meet in the middle, one person, can they wait 5 minutes? Probably. And then the other person can finish up their task or whatever they're doing and then be able to fully listen, consensually, because they're not kind of getting blindsided with this information. A lot of folks, especially if they're leaning a little more avoidant, it can be very helpful to have some heads up when intense emotional conversations are coming, even if it doesn't have anything to do with you. It can just be helpful for them to understand that a lot of emotional intensity is coming their way. All right, and then communicating that you understand your partner's need and why it's important to them. So again, even if it is like not something you need, really communicating that you hear them, that it's important to them, that you understand, like you're trying to see through their lens for a bit. And why tending to that is important to you, why you also want to meet their needs. That will make someone feel very heard, very understood. So even if you do, fail to do it correctly, they know that you want to, and they'll be more inclined to tell you, hey, we talked about this, and you said you wanted to do, and it'll help that conversation come up again. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, being clear on your own boundaries and limits in meeting the needs. So we're not going to be able to meet every need our partner has. It's just not going to be possible, especially if someone has a lot of needs that come up. So being able to create what your boundaries are, what they can expect from you. So again, in our example, like when you come home from work, I'm still working, or I'm working on this thing. Would you be able to give me 5 minutes? I'm going to need 5 minutes at least to finish up what I'm doing sometimes. Or would you give me a heads up when you need to have these conversations? And then that will help them understand really what they can expect from you. This isn't going to be an all or nothing for each person. They're both going to have to, push themselves out of their comfort zone a little bit. And then it's really important to check back in that your partner understands what your limits are. Or not just your partner, but this can again apply to family, friends, because right now, especially during COVID, when we're all home a lot of the time, people expect us to be available 24/7. And that's another thing. We're communicating, I have to take breaks from my phone. I have to take breaks from talking to people, or anything like that. Make sure that people understand that. And it may feel harsh, but that is not meant to be, it's not meant to be mean. It's just meant to be clear, because you don't want to resent those people. Again, like on the top I wrote, resentment is your cue. If you're seeing someone's name pop up on your phone a bunch of times and you're starting to think like, oh my goodness, that's a cue of maybe I should communicate something to this person. All right, next slide, please. Okay, let me see, I'm looking at time. All right, so we've got about 15 more minutes, I think. This is another thing that came out of the Gottman Institute that is so important. I just want to scream it from the rooftops, basically, that people learn this, because this is the #1 predictor of marital success, is noticing bids for attention. So that might sound weird, and I'll explain it. So basically, if I'm sitting in a room and I notice like a really pretty bird outside, I'm like, aw. And my partner's sitting across from me reading or scrolling Instagram, and they don't say, oh, what are you looking at? That's a bid. So I may not even know that I'm making a bid for a connection or for attention, or even looking at your Instagram and laughing to yourself. That doing something out loud where your partner is present, them turning towards and showing interest or showing, that they care, that is the part that's actually going to make a huge long-term difference. Because not turning and not showing that you care, Even if the person who said, "Aw," I'm like looking at something out the window randomly, not even knowing that they want their partner to care, those moments where you don't turn towards your partner, those chip away, just at feeling loved, at feeling seen, at that initial connection definition that we talked about. So I really want to emphasize this is a simple thing to do, but when your partner or anyone, you know, in your life does chuckle or they may not know how to say, like, I want to connect with you right now, or I just saw something silly and I want to see if you think it's silly too. They may just laugh and not want to bother you, and at least acknowledging, like, what's so funny? Or what are you laughing at? Though that tiny little difference can change the whole outcome of a relationship, which I just think is crazy that we don't know this, / this isn't like a common knowledge thing, because who would know that you should check in when your partner like makes a sound across the room? So just want to make sure I got that in here. All right, some things to avoid. I'm going to kind of breeze through these, but again, if you go to the Gottman Institute online, you can find like a bunch more about communication, things to avoid, that kind of thing. So criticism of character. This doesn't mean you don't complain or say like, hey, you said you were going to take out the trash. This is more about like you're mean or you're lazy. So you want to replace those again with the I feel statements plus your need. Like, I feel hurt when you talk to me like that. So contempt, that's when you roll your eyes, you're mocking, you basically think you're like a much higher functioning person than the other one. And that just comes through and can really erode the relationship. And so replace that one with reminding yourself of a person's positive qualities in moments where they do something that you think is really annoying, or, you know, whatever it is that you want to ridicule, remind yourself of their positive qualities in that moment. Next slide, please. Okay, defensiveness, so natural, so normal to want to do this, but this will lead people when the person does suggest something else. Often it's perceived criticism, even if it may be a complaint about what's going on. Looking for excuses, trying to pick apart what the person just said to you, blaming your partner. All of this is, again, going to come back to that attachment of feeling like you're going to leave me, or I'm not good enough for you, or whatever it is. So it's a totally natural thing to feel. And again, trying to be mindful and kind of arming you with this information that that is a natural thing to feel and that you don't necessarily want to indulge it. So if it does come up, you know, there's always apologies that you can do, but accept their perspective. You know, take responsibility for any wrongdoing that you did. You can obviously defend yourself if you think it's outlandish, but I think it's more important to try to hear what the person's perspective is before you go straight to defending yourself. Again, when you do defend yourself, you know, make it an I feel confused because that is not what I meant, or, you know, whatever it is. And then stonewalling, this is the one you really, really want to try to avoid. This is kind of like just the Achilles heel of relationships. So this is when you feel like there's contempt, when just stops responding, tunes out, turns away, like they get totally flooded. So this is when you're just psychologically, like too much is happening, and then you can become kind of mean if you do respond. So people are like, I just shouldn't respond right now. And the thing to do here is to take a break. Like if you're really getting flooded and you just do not feel like you are going to respond in a positive way right now, it is okay to say, and try to say it calmly, even though once you're getting to the stonewalling position, this is going to be very, very hard. But say, like, I want to talk to you about this and I'm really overwhelmed. I need to take a walk, and can we talk about this when I get back? And the partner needs to respect that. So that's a really important note for when you're getting in these conflicts. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this was just a really neat quote that I found by a therapist. Empathy and compassion must coexist with boundaries and accountability. I think that is also for yourself. So your empathy and compassion towards yourself also, and being accountable as well to like what your partner needs. So you want to enforce these things in your relationship, and you also want to apply them to yourself too. Next slide. So some more stuff that I have just heard wonderful things about or have read myself. So Hold Me Tight is by Sue Johnson. She's a psychologist who talks about attachment and how that goes in your therapeutic relation, or not therapeutic relationships, in your personal relationships. And then Attached, that's one where you can take quizzes on your attachment style and kind of talk through with your partner how those might be interacting together. And then the Gottman Institute online just has a ton of awesome stuff to look through. They've got little videos. It's a lot. But again, they kind of harness in on the most statistically like effective ways to stop, bad conflicts from getting worse and promoting positive communication. I hope that some of this was helpful. I think the next slide's just my resources or references. Yeah. But yeah, if you want to ask, we've got about 7 minutes left, and I'm happy to talk more or read some questions or whatnot.
Sure. Colleen, the first question that came up was, can you explain the squirrel analogy that you used a bit more?
Yeah, totally. So I think I was talking about anger. So when I was thinking about this presentation beforehand, I was going to say like a little goblin, and then I decided to make it a squirrel because I don't want us to fear our anger. I don't want anger to seem like this big, dark thing that we should run from and be ashamed of. So that's why I made it a squirrel. But basically, when you have a feeling, trying to take it outside of yourself. So whatever would be a fun picture for you. So say you've got the squirrel and the squirrel's angry. Like what would this squirrel say if it could say how it's feeling? And then that would hopefully, is that what you're talking about? Not the bird, not the bid for attention. I hope I answered the right.
Yeah, it was earlier in your presentation.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, like if my anger could talk, or if my sadness could talk, because sometimes the sadness takes over and it's hard to even speak. So if you think about your sadness, being outside of you, holding it in your hand, like what would my sadness say right now? Like, I feel so alone, or I feel hopeless. Like, I think sometimes taking it outside yourself can often allow for more thinking about it rather than being drowning in the emotion of it.
Kind of like separating ourselves a bit from it to get that better sense of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me check. We have just a few minutes left. If anybody else in the audience has any questions for Colleen, we got to the one that we've gotten so far. Okay, there's a new one here. Any strategies on how to balance wanting to spend time with your partner and time with family, friends, or even alone, kind of doing your own thing? I think this is something that I hear quite a bit from students as well.
Yeah, it's so hard to find like the perfect balance because I think anytime there's just too many things that we all want to do, which I think is one of the beautiful things about life. Like so many people we want to love and spend time with, and at the same time spend time with ourselves. I think, really taking some inventory, maybe journaling, or at the end of each day, think about what were the parts of your day, that felt really rejuvenating for you. What's your energy, like just being present with yourself. What's your energy level that day? Are you feeling extroverted? Are you feeling like you need a day to binge watch some stuff by yourself? I think taking inventory and then communicating what you need. I think it really starts with paying attention to those cues when you start to feel overwhelmed. You feel like you can't be everything to everyone. Taking a step back and thinking, what's a sustainable thing for me to do? If I want a night of reading, or if I need a night to myself, how can I tell my friends and family, I just need a night to myself. I love you so much. Could we do something next week? So I think really just keeping tabs on what your emotional bank and your energy bank has in it, and that's going to look different week to week, but utilizing those communication strategies where you state how you're feeling and that you can appreciate what the other person's asking of you, and that they want to be with you too because you're probably wonderful. So.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and look at some of the other questions that have popped up. Okay, so let's say, partner one is like super interested in learning about themselves and learning
Mm-hmm.
how their background and experiences play into their relationship and wanting to do a lot of work in terms of understanding those different communication styles and attachment
Mm-hmm.
styles. How would you talk about this to your partner who maybe isn't as interested, or this might not be on their radar? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you have some strategies for maybe starting these conversations with a partner so that both people are kind of on the same page with like, hey, this is something we can work on together as a,
Yeah.
as a unit?
Yeah, that is a totally fair and common thing, I would think, for one partner to be maybe a little more like psychologically inquisitive. Um, I think expressing the importance to you, to your partner, saying, I've noticed some dynamics in our relationship, and like, I love you and I want to grow with you. Um, I've heard some really interesting things like on a webinar today, or there's this book I'm really curious about reading, or I found this article. Would you be willing to read it with me? I think some of it may apply to us. And they may like, nah, I don't want to, no thanks. And then that is something that you have to kind of navigate, like, okay, because you have to respect that people aren't going to do everything you want. I think then you can repackage it again if you want to go for round two. Or you can also think, okay, I'm going to respect that. And can I continue to be in this relationship with someone who doesn't want to do that work with me? Is our relationship, strong enough to make it through? I know we're kind of like, well, really on time, so I'll do another question, but I have kind of a neat analogy, but that's okay.
No, you're fine. So we just have a minute left, and so I'm just going to share with folks, because I know we didn't get through all of the questions today, but just as a heads up, our next webinar that's coming up is actually focused on like family dynamics and family relationships. And so I've seen a couple of questions in the chat around kind of like family stuff, and I feel like next time that we do this is going to be a really good chance to go into like the family dynamic and aspects of things that might be particularly relevant right now while we're, quarantining or staying safe at home, maybe closer to our family than we typically are during the school year. So just kind of as a plug for our next webinar, I think some of those questions will probably be answered in that one as well. But just in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap us up for today and just say thank you so much, Colleen, for navigating all those technical difficulties and joining us today. That was great.
Thanks for everyone's patience as I just was really on the struggle bus.
And I mentioned this in the chat, but this a recorded version of this presentation will be available both on our YouTube channel and also on our website. If you go under the self-help resources, there's a recorded presentations tab, and you'll find that. And it typically takes us just a week or two to get that up there once we process and do the captioning for it. So if you missed any points and you want to maybe watch this with your partner, that could be a good opportunity to do that. So, all right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you for the next webinar. All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.